Welcome to the first episode of the Think Twice podcast. I'm Jacob Schreiner Briggs alongside my co-host.
I'm Jordan Newell.
So, just to give the listeners a little bit of background, I had recently been listening to podcasts this summer. I guess I'm late to the party, but I'd gotten into a few of them, and I found them to be a very accessible an open format for dialogue on important issues. And I like the diversity that they offer in terms of having conversations across a multitude of topics. So once I got into them, I thought, just sort of as a relaxed summer project, I would start one. And I didn't expect to, generate a big following. It was going to be a side project. And then recently, Jordan reached out after I had previously texted him and asked if he'd like to be a guest to talk about some of the work that he's doing with the opposition and the March for Truth. And then a few weeks after that conversation, Jordan reached back out and inquired about co-hosting it. And that's just a really exciting opportunity with Jordan's following on Twitter and all the work that he's doing at the grassroots level with politics and the issues that matter to a lot of people for a lot of important reasons. So after reaching out, we agreed to make this a joint effort, and we're getting it off the ground now. So thank you, Jordan, for this opportunity, and I'm excited. Hopefully, we produce some good conversations now and moving forward.
Well, yeah, thank you, Jacob. The honor is mine. I think for context, for the listeners, Jake and I went to college together, and I always revered Jake is one of our brighter guys in our program. So I think we'll be able to produce good, substantive discussions. We'll have interesting guests, and we'll try to keep the topics relevant to what's happening in the news, and hopefully you learn something along the way.
Yeah. So that about sums it up. We did Moot Court together.
Yeah, we did.
All right. Well, so then what's on the menu for today? What are we talking about?
Man, I think the elephant in the room is the Russian investigation. This seems like a news story breaking almost every day.
Yeah, it's a slippery fish.
Yeah.
So it's hard to keep everything in perspective with this, and I think a big part of that is what you mentioned. I mean, it is quite literally a daily development, and keeping track of who's implicated in what allegation and who's reporting what and what the possible biases are in all of this reporting. It's really difficult from my perspective to sift through all of it from a big picture standpoint. And I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, and I think this lines up with the March for Truth, honestly, I think that whatever happens in terms of a check on the Trump administration and the investigation, it needs to not only be independent, but appear independent. So we have, in the era of fake news, a penchant to, I think, dismiss things that disagree with our preconceived biases as partisan or corrupt or whatever it is. So with something this big and this complicated, no matter what the truth is, which obviously that's important, but I think the means to getting there needs to be a clear understanding and perception on the part of the American public that what's happening is honestly independent, nonpartisan, non-political, so that when we reach conclusions, we can trust them. Because I think right now that's very, very important. I think one of the biggest things that led to the Trump presidency is a lack of trust, or was a lack of trust in our political institutions. And this is a really big moment, I think, to either rebuild that trust or to contribute, more so to its erosion. So, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's where I'm at least from a big picture standpoint.
No, I think that's an excellent point. One of the hardest pills to swallow during the Obama administration was the drone strikes.
Yeah.
I mean, I so badly wanted to believe he was this great peacemaker. He wasn't a genuinely bad guy, but it just took a while. But I finally accepted it. Like, he's got a tarnished legacy because of the military actions, and I think that understandably was difficult for me to finally realize. And I understand why conservatives are having a hard time believing this. I think just deep down they don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
But really, that's why this March for Truth is so important, because ultimately it's a bipartisan issue. Because if the shoe was on the other foot, Republicans would be doing it, and I think Democrats would be dragging their feet.
Yeah, I agree.
This
I
idea,
agree with that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This idea of justice and fairness and integrity in government, everyone espouses it. Everyone acts like they care about it. But when it comes time to kind of walk the walk, they're nowhere to be found. And I do wish that we would have more conservative support on this issue. It just seems like such a simple concept, like honesty and integrity in government and transparency. I think deep down that's what all of us want, but no one wants our representative or our candidate or politician to be the one that falls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it becomes something akin to a football game where you're just rooting for your team, and if the team loses, it's more likely that the officiating was bad, or the other team cheated, or whatever it is. And the implications of that line of thinking, if held within the context of something like sports, is fairly insignificant, I would think. But when we're talking about not just electing our leaders, but then operating as a check on them, really that's sort of defaulting towards excuse making or confirmation bias, or sort of retroactive justification. I mean, it's dangerous, because any system of government that allows you to elect the people that are representing you and making decisions requires you to be a check on them. And lately, and I'm not educated enough to really date this trend, but we know that our constitutional structure entrusts Congress with the power and the responsibility to serve as a check on the executive branch. But because we live in an age of political polarization, much of the time Congress serves as a check on the president when the president is of the opposite party. And I think it's significant in the context of the Russia issue that I think more recently than at the beginning of all of this starting to emerge, we see more prominent Republican figures, I think finally publicly admitting that to a degree where there's smoke, there's fire. And right now there's a lot of smoke. I mean, and we could go through the names of people aligned with Trump and his campaign and the implications. But I don't know. Hopefully then it's a sign that we do have more bipartisan movement on this. And it's not to prove Trump voters wrong or prove Republicans wrong. It's to ensure that people in our government aren't in ways that are dangerous to democracy and to the integrity of our processes, colluding with Russia, whether it's government or independent operatives or whatever that might be.
I agree. I think your sports analogy was perfect, and it relates to a conversation I had a couple weeks ago. When I first, the March for Truth first started going, I sent a link about it to somebody I knew, a conservative attorney. And this person replied, I'm not on your team, but I support what you're doing. And I was like, well, this really isn't about teams. I mean, this is something I would think, especially an attorney, would appreciate, a fair inquiry. That just seems like something central to who they are as an attorney. And this person was very upset that I replied that way and said, well, I was just trying to give you a compliment, and we have not talked since. Yeah, so this team mentality is ingrained in who we are, it seems.
And that's incomprehensible to me, because to say I'm not on your team, but I appreciate what you're doing, suggests to me anyway that I like that you're involved, but I don't support the actual content of the involvement. So involvement, sure, is important, obviously, and that just goes back to the nature of any democratic form of government. You need to be involved, but we're talking about a march, a grassroots movement that is designed to generate independent investigation into something that's very serious. And again, I do understand the administrative biases, but I think that goes back to your point that if Hillary Clinton and her campaign team, higher ups in the DNC, had the kind of connections to the Putin government that those closely associated with Trump have, I mean, there's no question that the Republican members of Congress would be calling for her head right now.
Absolutely.
And so, as a liberal, as a Democrat, I can't sit here and promise that the intensity with which I hold these views would be the same. I mean, I think in some ways we can all be victims to this sort of these preconceived biases, but I do think that if I was seeing this kind of evidence, and it was associated with Hillary Clinton, I too would want to know what exactly is going on. And so, yeah, I hope that moving forward, things like the March for Truth and further discussion on this really brings the focus back into the common interest that we have, that regardless of party, we should all be able to agree that Russia, of all countries, and Vladimir Putin, of all political leaders, it's not the crowd that we want our leaders sort of nefariously hanging out with and
especially
working with.
especially when it comes at the expense of diplomatic relations with our allies.
Yeah.
If we're straining our relationship with other countries to curry favor with Putin, maybe we need to reassess our relationships.
Yeah, and that's scary. I mean, I saw recently the sort of post-mortem on Trump's recent international travel suggests that it's France and Germany that are uniting, sort of to the exclusion of the United States, because both Merkel and Macron have stated pretty clearly their misgivings and their issues with the Russian government and the state-run media like RT and those sort of concerns. And Donald Trump just simply isn't willing to acknowledge those sort of concerns. And so now we have a fracturing between the United States and other countries in Europe that, as far as I can remember, have served as our closer allies, our Western European allies. So yeah, it's a problem, especially with Trump's sort of mudslinging at NATO, and I mean these are international institutions that are very, very important if we accept the premise that international relations operate under the guise of political realism. It's important to have allies. It's important to have common interests. It's important to trust your allies and to work with them. And at the nascency of this administration, we're seeing erosions in relationships that for a long time have been some of the more steady and dependable ones. So I don't know. There's a lot to be concerned about, and that's why grassroots efforts to get at the bottom of things and to hold government accountable are just really important as they've been in a long time, I would think.
Yeah, and that's why work like what Town Hall Project is doing it is so important. They have mobilized thousands, tens of thousands of people to their local town halls nationally, and that is a purely grassroots effort. A young man, Jimmy Dahman, he's also from Ohio, started with a spreadsheet, and he was sharing this information, and that really took off. So you're seeing this type of hunger and drive to get involved, and I do think this is attributable to the Women's March and the infrastructure that they created, along with the organizing capacity from Indivisible. I think those three groups and those three efforts are absolutely attributable to what is happening now. This type of unprecedented engagement. I think this, to me, is better than the Tea Party, because that was so astroturf. You saw tons of Koch brothers money behind that. Yeah. If you look at the Women's March, that was a group of passionate organizers who came together with very little time between the election and Inauguration Day and created a massive movement. Jimmy with Town Hall Project started with a spreadsheet, and Indivisible were a group of young former congressional staffers who just took their knowledge that they gleaned from the Tea Party movement and put it into a guide. I mean, this is and now March for Truth. We started this on Twitter with 3 people. I don't know if it can get more grassroots than what's happening now.
Yeah, what are the specs on that? I mean, how many people? How many marches?
We are close to 140 cities worldwide.
Wow,
which is unbelievable. It's hard to tell how many people are coming, but we do expect a really great turnout, especially in our flagship cities like DC, New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. We have a great slate of congressional leaders speaking: Jerry Nadler, Brad Sherman, Mike Quigley, Jamie Raskin. Linda Sarsour from the Women's March is speaking in DC. The guy who is playing Hamilton right now on Broadway, Javier Munoz, is performing in New York. We have authoritarian and tyranny expert Timothy Snyder in New York. If you go to our website, marchfortruth.info, and click on the news tab, you'll see our most recent press release, which gives you a rundown of who is speaking in the major cities. I think this is something that, on both sides of the aisle, anybody who really cares about our democracy, people who really want our elected officials to be held accountable, should get involved. This is not a march for impeachment. This is not calling for Trump to go to prison. We're not chanting lock him up. This is just for an independent commission. There are a lot of people asking us if this is an impeachment march, and we are very firm in saying no. It just go ahead.
And that it's so important. I mean, it's not a march for truth insofar as truth benefits the Democratic Party.
Right.
I know it's starting to get redundant, but I just think that's the point for me. Knowing how convoluted this is, but knowing how important it is and how serious it is, that the American public holds its leaders accountable. I don't care what party those leaders are from. I don't necessarily care, where they stand on certain issues. I mean, obviously I care, but not in the context of these sort of allegations. I mean, at that point, I just want to know, if I'm a voter, if I'm an American citizen, I just want to know what's going on. And so when I hear March for Truth, and again, as separated from a March for Impeachment, more, I guess, politically charged or more partisan sort of requests, I don't know. I think it's good, and I hope it gets recognition in a broad-based sort of way. I mean, it's already, just based off of that information, obviously there's a ton of momentum behind it. But I hope that it's not just Democrats, it's not just left-leaning people that take this seriously.
Yeah, we would absolutely welcome conservatives who do care about our government, want transparency, and want integrity. We would welcome them, and we would enjoy their participation, because I think it would send a stronger message. More importantly, Congress needs to start to react. I'm starting to become concerned that they will only react if Trump becomes a liability in 2018, right. And if they start to see they will lose their jobs. And ultimately, I mean, we might get the result that we want, but it won't be like we didn't get there because of the right thought process. It was if it's purely self-serving, it doesn't give us any hope for the future.
Right. Yeah. It's response for the wrong reasons, and I think I might be messing up this reference. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was Sam Harris's podcast, and he had David Frum on the podcast to talk about Trump. And one of the things David Frum pointed out was that I believe it was in response to the tapes, the Billy Bush, fiasco during the campaign, that it was Paul Ryan who responded. He responded publicly. He denounced, what he should have denounced. He denounced something that obviously was worth denouncing, and they did some polling data on Paul Ryan after that happened, and according to Frum, he had dropped, I think, some 20 points.
Wow.
In his Republican Party approval rating, and so it does seem to be the case that with developments that continually make the president less and less attractive to voters, that's been the key to unlocking some Republican Congress people to take a public stand or to denounce certain things, to ask questions that they weren't asking before. And so while that's progress at the end, it's not progress at the means, because again, if the motivation is, well, I want to maintain popularity, I want to maximize my reelection prospects, and now Trump's not as favorable amongst the American people as he was before, so that gives me now the opportunity or the obligation to speak out. I mean, that's not the mentality that should be driving these sort of assessments. I mean, we should be electing people who have principles, and if there is an action or a statement made, or whatever it may be, that runs contrary to those principles, then there should be a statement that makes clear that those actions or those words aren't acceptable by that given politician. But I think the evidence points pretty clearly to the fact that that's not how our elected officials operate, and that's not how they're making those decisions.
No, I agree. I think we've seen
Is there anything we disagree about?
I don't know. It depends. I mean, I think that'll come in,
We'll
in
figure it
future
out.
episodes. Maybe I don't know how you feel about single payer, but that's something I'm maybe there. I'm not sure.
I like it. I'm a fan.
Then I guess we're not going to disagree about much.
Yeah.
Let's get
next time.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's exciting what you're doing, and it's necessary, and because I think the biggest thing too is that in the face of all of this, apathy is the most destructive force in a democracy. Apathy in the electorate. So, you organize marches like this, you participate in things, you go to town halls, you write letters, you get invested in the democratic process. That's just step one. I think the harder step is step two, and that if you don't get the result that you were seeking, you need to make a decision at that point then to either give up and to retreat and to be comfortable in your own little milieu, or to continue with organizing marches and writing letters and staying involved. And so I think that's going to be crucial for people who see what you're doing and see what these other grassroots organizations are doing and are feeling motivated about it. It can't be the case that if there isn't an immediate response or an immediate result that we, take our ball and go home. You have to keep, your nose to the grindstone on things like this.
Certainly. And for context, I have never organized a protest in my life. I don't really like to go. I went to the Women's March because I felt that was something I needed to attend. But other smaller ones, I usually will just skip and kind of see how they turn out on social media. But this is something, it was just getting so frustrating watching people like Nunez and Burr obstruct every step of the way. And then Tim Mack wrote a piece in the Daily Beast talking about how the Senate Intelligence Committee's investigative component, or the staff of that committee, was just being starved. It was severely understaffed, under-resourced. They were setting it up for failure. They knew if they just cut the lifeline to that committee, nothing would come out of it. And that's when Justin Hendricks and Andrea Chalupa, we were all talking about it, and we decided, well, let's just do something. We'll organize a protest. This is ridiculous. And then it just Comey got Comey got fired like a week later, and we were in way over our heads.
Oh, the Comey fire!
Yeah.
Oh God, there's so much to unpack here.
I know, right? This is like 5 episodes.
So for our listeners, Jordan and I had planned on a 10 to 20 minute introductory episode, and I'm looking at the clock, and we're around
20.
I might be a little bit off.
20,
What are we
24 on my end.
24, yeah, and you can still keep. I mean, we haven't even started to unpack any of the specifics. It's so crazy. There's so much going on. But we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize one person.
Yes.
We'll have to keep track of the time so he knows. But Luis, our first Patreon subscriber.
Absolutely, Luis Cadena at LuisCadena. Go follow him.
Yep. Thank you, Luis. We appreciate it. Hopefully we're not letting you down here. Hopefully you're enjoying what you're hearing.
And if you want to be a Patreon subscriber, go to patreon.com/thinktwice.
All right. Well, thanks again, Luis.
Yes.
It's been incredibly fun to kind of, take off the training wheels and have our first conversation. Certainly there's so much more we can dive into, and hopefully we will be moving forward. I mean, it's important, it's exciting, and it's fun to have these sort of conversations. And I know, moving forward we'll have some guests on here. Hopefully we can line up some pretty interesting people and have some good conversations.
And for the listeners, tell us what you want to hear. We're going to try to have different intellectuals and thought leaders on different subject matters going forward. And if there's an issue that you think we should examine and have experts in the field discuss, tweet at us at ThinkTwicePod.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for listening to the first episode of the Think Twice podcast. I'm Jacob Schreiner Briggs with Jordan Yule, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.